That's much better.
This is very helpful. I like the summary of, because it was hard to kind of keep track of our discussion, so you did a great job.
It took a while to put
I
this
bet.
together, but I'm hoping it'll give a nice summary and it'll help people kind of focus on what's actually different versus what just maybe got rephrased.
Yes, this makes it much easier to track the work that we've done, actually. So I liked it.
Okay, so I'll
Chat box message, Melanie Debates has joined us and will stay on as long as she can. She's came up as Nathan Stellinga.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks. So as we go through today's edits, so I didn't add any content for the sections we're going to review today. So once we get that flushed out, I will make those revisions and then work on some formatting. So the document actually, prints out in a way that doesn't break things across pages and is better, easier to understand. So those are the updates. I also, oh, sorry. So I'm going to pull up the actual roles and responsibilities document now. So I added, where did it go? There it is. So we have a table of contents. So you should be able to click on the section or the page and it will take you to that. And then we also have, each section has references. I called it references because I started including like all of the resources and authority, but I'm kind of considering changing the references to the word authority because then later I separated them out. And I did figure out a way that the actual document could be linked versus it just taking you to the provider portal page. So that was a happy discovery. And the one thing I wanted to just ask you guys' opinion on, I kind of struggled with was this. So the standard ISP guide is a really good example. That applies to numerous sections throughout the document. So right now I have it listed with each one. But like at the end, you might have noticed, I'm not going to scroll all the way through it, but at the end of the document, I created kind of a separate section where I referenced the TheraP user guide and what else did I put down there? Some of the HCBS settings guidance. So just wanted to get your guys' feedback on is it helpful to have it with each section so you have the resources right there? Should we have one kind of appendix or resources section at the end, or is it helpful maybe to have it in both places? I wasn't really sure what would be most useful.
I personally think it's useful at each section.
This is Sharon. I would agree.
Yeah, this is Arlette, and I was going to state the same thing. So.
Julie, you're muted.
I don't know why I ever mute myself. I always do that. So with the TheraP user guide and the HCBS settings guidance that kind of encompasses all of the areas, does it make sense to keep those at the end in a separate section? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I will leave that the way it is. And then if there are any other kind of more general resources that we think of as we talk today, or that you guys think of offline, send those to me and we can include more than just those couple things in the end section too. Okay, I think that's all the follow-up I had for today. So I will, get moving down to the sections we need to talk about today. And we'll
Can you
spend
make it a little bit larger, please, Julie?
Yes. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's just see, let's see if the table of contents works, and then you guys don't have to watch me scroll. It won't be so painful. Come on. Is it not? Well, I'm just highlighting everything
Maybe
now.
to hit enable editing.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, well, that'll be something to work on later.
I think it does work.
Well, it worked yesterday. Maybe I'm probably just getting click happy.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go.
Alrighty. Feel like there should be a drum roll.
At long last.
Thank you. So as we noted, there obviously is a need systemically to do a training on rights restrictions and HCBS settings rule and the implications of that. So we're shooting for sometime in October to host that training for the system. We don't have it completely finalized at this point. But otherwise, thoughts, questions? We have some highlighted areas.
What are the
On the
highlighted?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask what the highlighted areas were.
So this, I think, was something that I was kind of questioning the verbiage, and I copied it out of that. Jace, you had sent me a document that was in draft form then. So I think it was that did not work is how that was phrased, but I wasn't like, I want it to be the same, but being a word nerd, I wasn't sure if it also kind of would reflect like things that were not effective. So that's probably just my own note. And then this was on the list that Jace had sent me, but I highlighted that, I think, just because I knew that we would want to discuss it and there would be some comments about it.
Yeah, and that is the verbiage in the waiver that says
Yeah.
the manager will approve all rights restrictions. Which we realize would be probably a little bit of a change.
I have a question just about the part on the case manager side about documenting in the ISP, all those different bullets. So I'm assuming that would be in the risk section of the ISP. And right now, case managers are linking the plans from the CSP for each identified restriction. And those plans then typically have this information. So are they rewriting all of this stuff or just linking the plan? Or are they supposed to have it and then the CSP copies it? I mean, I'm trying to just wrap my head around it because it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that we would essentially, there would be some revisions probably that would be need to be made to that ISP, their ISP guide. What we ultimately have to determine, and I would probably consult with DSS just to make sure, is because the federal authority is pretty clear about all of these requirements being documented in the ISP. And so could we confidently say that a supplemental attachment meets that requirement? And we just need to make sure that we are covering that because CMS is pretty clear. So that is kind of the decision point that we would have to make, and whatever decision we do make on that would be updated in that guide. And what the documentation requirements are and where exactly they need to be documented in the ISP.
So we don't have a section yet in the Interact for this, right? So that's what you guys are talking about, is where to document.
There's the risk section, but it doesn't, somebody who's probably more familiar with it.
You can't, I mean, that only allows like a quick little title.
Right.
We can't put any sort of narrative in there or descriptions or anything like that, Jays. So I'm a little concerned. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to specifying. I mean, like Amy said, that typically is on the CSP. It should be listed on the CSP rights restriction plan. So I'm just wondering where we would put this. I mean, the only place I can think, I know that once upon a time, Therap was going to have a program that was related to like behavior support plans or rights restrictions, and then that went away. So now, and we only have access to ISP programs. So I mean, if we're going to be, as case management, if we're going to be expected to document all of this, I really feel like we need to have a very clear plan to where we're going to document that. Or can we, like I think Amy referenced, upload the CSP rights restriction document to the rights that we can do to the rights restriction section, the risk section. It's not a rights restriction section, it's a risk section. So we could upload that. Otherwise, we would have to just like have case managers write something in a Word document and then upload it or put it in the discussion record. I don't know. I worry about it being there like that.
Where does the ISP team discussion about rights restrictions get? So I understand that part 2 is the plan of restoration, which is typically in that attachment, but the ISP discussion about rights restrictions, where is that documented now? Or is that a missing element?
I would say that's a big missing element.
Okay.
At least for the majority. Sometimes I don't know that it's even discussed. And we just get, I don't know. I think definitely some more guidance or some more discussion needs to happen in this area. And then the clear expectations, if we roll out some kind of training for everybody to hear, because I think the CSPs all do it differently. And we don't get a whole lot of interaction or discussion, especially with restoration plans. So more of a cohesive collaboration in this is what I'm concerned. And I don't see it here. I don't see how we can build that in here. So I'm hoping that today we can kind of figure this out. And I like that maybe the HCBS settings will steer it that way. I don't know. That's just
Well, I think that to that point, where CMS is clear about this in the final rule, again, it puts the conversation and the discussion in the ISP, which then becomes more of a case management facilitation, which I think is the piece that's currently maybe not happening in our system as much. To kind of what you're alluding to is you're finding out after the fact and then basically getting sent a document, but the discussion isn't happening within the ISP team. Right. So that's where we, one, have to make sure we're compliant with this federal authority. That's very clear. But two, also have to leverage the federal authority, that the expectation is very clear that rights restrictions is a team decision and a team discussion. And the documentation has to be included in the ISP, as well as then waiver kind of cements the fact by saying that ultimately the case manager is responsible to review rights or approve rights restrictions to kind of align with that federal authority. So how that works in process, obviously, I think we do need to have that discussion. but the federal expectations are pretty clear.
So I think we just need to define then how it gets documented in the ISP, because there's not a great mechanism. Katie Kelly in the chat box suggested discussion record, and Katie Munson brought that up as well as one possibility. But to me, it seems like maybe it deserves its own section.
This is Sharon, and that is exactly what I was gonna say. It's gonna get missed in any discussion record if it's not listed as in a separate section.
If TheraP could add a comment box or a, I
Or
don't know.
a whole section just for this,
Right.
to
right.
talk about positive support plans and rights restrictions.
Instead of the risk and just labeling that.
Because rights restrictions, if you in the quarterlies, are always listed under the risk area.
Is there room in the agenda to add a section, or is that completely insane to think about?
Offhand, I feel like it would be easier for us to revise the ISP agenda than to request TheraP change the whole ISP template. We have not been successful in other requests to changes in that template. But I'm willing to explore it because I mean, every state has to comply with this. So how and where are other states documenting this in the ISP? Because I totally agree that it could very easily get lost in the shuffle.
So it could easily be, could it just be added to the HCBS section of the agenda where it's all those random things that you have to address for everyone?
Yeah, and
So-
the required items is kind of what I was thinking. Yeah.
We've had, when Kelly was the case management contact at DDD,
Yes.
we had an ISP agenda like committee that talked about the required areas that has never been followed back up on. I believe I sent that in my meeting request, my meeting agenda request for that group. And so I think that this would definitely be an area for that, because right now, our case managers at RHD have it in the individual section, to, other supports, other rights restrictions, that may need discussed, because it is a hit or miss, right? It's an NA sometimes that people don't have those concerns or that part of their plan. So, yeah, I don't know why it couldn't just go down in the required areas. And I also have the question is, can we have some of these bullet points, those sub bullet points that you have here under document in the ISP? I don't want those as they're each in, own section. But can an ISP agenda have that included? So have those bullet points outlined in that section. I don't know. I don't know.
It's been a while since we've submitted changes for that to TheraP. So I would need to kind of go back and see what format we had sent those before. But I mean, we have some explanation in some of the other required item questions. So I don't see why not. I don't know how the formatting would look, and if it would be bullets or, how they would accommodate that. But I think that's a good idea.
Whatever format it's in, we need to make sure that it allows for multiple rights restrictions, because there are people that have several.
You would only have one section under that.
Yeah, well, and I definitely think that this is something that we, after this meeting, internally need to kind of look and dig through TheraP and what we think, and obviously engage in a conversation with TheraP. Obviously, this is a federal requirement, so I don't understand why they wouldn't address this in the ISP template, because all states would have the same requirement. But Unfortunately, that doesn't always take us very far, so we might have to make, accommodations, and if the ISP is what we can edit, then that might have to be where it ends, but I agree, I would like to see a very specific section that provides an opportunity to document the restrictions as well as everything. Basically, it's like a fill in everything that CMS is asking for.
Well, and I think it's already, I think it already exists with their app. We just haven't been given the go ahead, because they already have a rights restriction program, or I don't remember what they called it. Maybe Laura
It's kind of like
remembers.
a behavior program.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
I
So
don't
I think
remember.
it already exists.
BIR.
And I
No, BIR.
yes, no.
No, that's like an incident report for behaviors.
Yeah, that's where you can track
But yeah, there is like a BSP sort of program now. I just don't know. I don't know enough about it to say yeah, that would for sure meet this need.
yeah, and getting that by January 1st would be.
But I think that would be the best, because I mean, there's data that should be collected on rights restriction progress. And
Right.
if we put it in the agenda, none of that's going to trigger this community support provider to have a place to document their progress on that. And so I really think it needs to be a program on the ISP. And I think you guys might be surprised, because I know it already exists, but there was something with South Dakota, I think, that they took it off the table.
Yeah, we'll have to follow up on, I mean, that'll be part of our follow-up to figure out the logistics. And one of my initial questions with that is, who writes that? Because again, if the requirement is that it's in the ISP and that that particular module is set up, that it's more of like that supplementary attachment, that goes back to what Jay's mentioned earlier, that we would just need to consult with DSS. So we'll do some follow-up on our end and kind of try to have at least some proposed solutions during the stakeholder meeting, because this will definitely come up. So at least we can say, here are the things we're exploring. So this can be documented in the ISP, but yeah, that gives us a couple weeks to check in with their app and explore some options.
One other, this is just typo to inform me of, Julie, is that last sub bullet. It says inventions. I think you meant interventions.
No, I definitely meant
It could be inventions.
hang on a second.
So anyway, I just saw that and I was like, oh, I better tell her that.
I also, okay, there we go. Thank you. All right, any questions? So we kind of worked through the case manager side and what that looks like for ISP documentation. Any comments on the CSP side?
I had one question about the first bullet. So conduct the assessment as determined by ISP team. I'm assuming that means the rights assessment. And under HCBS settings, is it the case manager that needs to do the rights assessment? And how will that change this at all, or what does that look like?
So in this situation, the requirement is that an assessment is done to demonstrate a need for a restriction. So the rights assessment is going to say somebody's rights that the case manager would be complaining is going to say, yes, somebody's rights are being restricted. Basically, they're going to review all of their rights and determine, are their rights being restricted or not. This assessment that CMS is describing is that before a restriction is set in place, there needs to be an assessed need. So some type of, whether that be a functional behavior assessment, some type of assessment has to be done to demonstrate a need to implement a restriction. Does that explain the difference?
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome.
So quick clarification too on the home and community, the HCBS settings assessment, which is the rights that we're referencing. Is that going to be expected to be done annually? Or is this a one-time thing? I guess I assumed it was a one-time thing.
Well, I would say it would likely have to be done probably, and obviously it's not specifically clarified in the assessment rule right now, but seeing as situations change and people change, and one year somebody might not have rights restriction, but the next year they do, it would likely be an ongoing assessment that be done at the time, around the time of the ISP.
And that would be a requirement of the case management to do that assessment every year.
Yes.
Well, that's okay. I guess we'll find out how that rolls. Because we haven't done it yet. I'm just a little concerned that that's going to be really time consuming or
Okay.
not done very well.
Okay.
That's a whole nother committee. Don't worry about it. Yep, that's a whole nother
It's
committee.
definitely something, we can, I know we got some comments back and need to make a few revisions. It's certainly something that we can pilot and gather feedback on. I don't think it's not a super lengthy assessment. I don't think it's intended to be incredibly time consuming. But it's more, I guess, of just a filter, just to make sure if they're saying, if we're saying there's no rights restrictions in place, that needs to stand true. So that's what the intent of that assessment is.
Yeah, the assessment is 3 pages and it's very easy to complete. I think per person, it's easy to complete. For a whole environment, it's harder to complete because you have different specifics per each person.
Right. Julie, on the CSP side, you had restrictions / modifications highlighted. Do you remember what?
Nope. I'm wondering if that was a verbiage thing. Do you remember?
Okay. I was just going to highlight that modifications for some reason is the language that CMS likes to use. So maybe that's why.
That might be. And maybe I just highlighted that because it's kind of a different verbiage than what our system has used for a long time.
Yeah. And I feel like we'll have to reference it as a modification to some extent because it is in that federal language, but I personally think, I guess the way that you have it written out maybe is the best way to do that, to clarify that.
So you think I can do it as a slash with the slash in it?
Yeah, and that's just something that we'll have to touch on in a training.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you should define that what does modification mean?
Yeah.
And then give some examples.
CMS says that, right, your rights are guaranteed, and anything that we would consider a rights restriction in the eyes of CMS is a modification. You're modifying somebody's rights. I don't know why they use that word, but there's a lot of things that they do that I don't understand.
Restrictions is so negative. That's probably why.
That could be, very much could be why.
Okay. Anything else on this one? Okay. That wasn't so bad.
As part of this training, I think it would be really, really nice to have, and this can be a side note, but to have kind of a structure for these expectations, so that the plans all include those same pieces on the CSP side. And yeah, just because, I mean, they're kind of all over the board with how they do them. And it'd just be nice to have kind of like a format that can still use some creativity or whatever, but it has those required areas outlined.
Just to make sure I'm not making an assumption as I take notes, is that like, are you thinking like a template that CSPs would use to like write a summary of what is the right being restricted, and then the outline of what's required for the restoration plans.
Yeah.
So what's the time limit? What's the outcome? What's all of those criteria?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Are you just saying like have some bullets about what's required to be included in a rights plan when it's presented to the committee?
Yeah, I think, you know, I've seen some guides from other states about writing behavior support plans or writing rights restrictions. And I think it might be nice to have kind of that, you know, that template along with a guide with it, just to build some consistency in the expectations.
Well, and that Jay's had to step away for a quick second, so she'll be right back. But I would add that, you know, as we kind of transition into talking about human rights committees, that might be helpful for human rights committees as well, to kind of, as in their review, to know here's what's required and make sure that you know, before they approve, that it meets all that criteria as well.
So I've created that at Lifescape because we do it all within TheraP. So we have an ISP program for each restriction, and then we have a data collection program for all data that's required for a restriction program. So it kind of provides a template for how to write the program. And then I created another one for how to run a report from the program for the Human Rights Committee review. If anybody wants to see that, I'd share.
Yeah, I would be interested in seeing that, just, yeah, as kind of the framework, and we could, you know, share that. And there's probably a way, and DD staff who are more savvy in TheraP than I am, probably already know this or to explain how to do it. And you guys probably know, but like, there's a way to share those templates, like in the global library. Is our template library? Yeah.
I don't know how to
Yes.
access it either.
I have mine just in the Lifescape library right now.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I would like to take a look at that, Amy. Thank you.
If you put it in the global template library, it has to go through TheraP and be approved by TheraP before it can go in a global template library.
Oh, okay.
yeah, Amy, I'm not patient enough for that. So if you want to share that with me too, that'd be great.
Yeah, share it with the people for now. I was just thinking ahead.
Also, we are at about 10:44. So we have about 45 minutes left, and we still have part of this one and a whole nother 30-minute section. So
Okay.
just wanted to
Can
give you
I
that
make
heads up.
a comment just on that little segue you guys were talking about with, I would push on the other side, and, you know, we don't put our behavior plans in TheraP. We meet the requirements that we have to, but we don't put all of them in there. So I would be raising my hand and saying that we don't, not to make it too restrictive or too, I don't know what that word is.
Maybe prescriptive.
There you go. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so let's step into the Human Rights Committee section. What we have here is just generally what's in rule and how that plays out on each side. So I think when we had first talked about this, there was some discussion about whether case managers participate in Human Rights Committee meetings. I don't know that that is, like, time-wise a feasible option, but I think what we know is that there needs to be more involvement by the case manager in that restriction and approval process. Jay's, I don't know, like, there's nothing in the settings rule that requires this particular function, is there?
No, that Human Rights Committee is a state, just a state described function. So the one thing that we would have to do and had discussed was, because the waiver does say that the case manager would approve the rights restrictions. So we had talked about essentially on whatever document is coming out of the HRC from the CSP, adding a line for like the case manager signature to also sign off on, and then have that as an attachment to the ISP. I'm certainly not opposed to the case managers participating in meetings, but I do know that that can, one, it's a time commitment, and two, there's also, like HIPAA, but if the case manager was only a part of the piece with the participant they're involved with is being talked about, if that was a solution, but
that's how I did it when I did a human rights committee. They were all invited, and then we ran, like they had, but I asked that they let me know if they were coming or not. I see Laura shaking her head, yes. And then for those that did attend, we ran through those ones first so that they could get back out on their way and do what they needed to do. And if they had multiples, then we ran through all of theirs, just one right after another. So, and then that kind of helped maintain that HIPAA and confidentiality and included them in the process as well.
That was a rare occurrence though. I mean, has a practice, has consistent across the West, I meant.
That's because I left the CSP world and I came here.
No, I just meant that was the only agency that, I mean, they still kind of do that, I think there. I think it carries on, but I just said Northern Hills was really the only agency that did that or does it now, so.
We do a system very similar to that, except it's for our internal coordinators, and they, come just when their people are being reviewed. And now if we would add case managers into that, obviously that's a different set of people. So it wouldn't, we couldn't do that. We couldn't basically group it by two groups, So just FYI.
Does that group then share with case managers, or how do they get
that? Yeah. And so, then they share the documents with the case managers, and case managers sometimes come. They know what time people are scheduled and they'll sometimes come, but not all of them, which.
So Julie, maybe is there a way to phrase that in that it's an option, but not mandatory?
Right.
Could it be like as requested by participant? Like if they have something that they are kind of not in agreement with, but their guardian has approved it, or, given the consent.
I think the concern would be is that participants or guardians may not even know about, or they didn't get the memo, they didn't open their mail or whatever, however that's sent to them. So I'm wondering if there's some way that it can just be, because I feel like we're talking about the CSP role, but that really the role of the case manager is to be aware of, to assist in advocating for the person, to be informed and educated, right? Like that's around this, not necessarily have to participate in the HRC committee meeting.
Right. I think the question becomes how do we make the link between the things that are expected up here and the actual approval by the committee, right? So that's kind of what's going on in my mind, is like, if there's a review and approval under this, there's also a review and approval with the Human Rights Committee. So how do we make sure both of those things happened? And the documentation in the ISP mirrors that which is presented to the HRC, or, like the same information is being, the documentation is consistent is what I'm trying to spit out. So it's just kind of linking that gap. That
I guess my interpretation would be that it wouldn't go if we know that case managers have to review and approve these. I would think that if the case manager isn't in agreement and isn't going to approve it, then it wouldn't go on to HRC. The team would need to reconvene and discuss and have more discussion on what is more appropriate before putting it onto HRC.
I mean, yeah, I would agree that whatever, and so in part, we're working on kind of, I guess, a little bit of a flow when it comes to implementing these restrictions, but because we're talking about merging the federal regulations with our state rules in this situation. And so, right, HRC is a South Dakota specific language requirement, but all of the things above in the rights restriction section should have been met. And then the HRC is just kind of giving this like, yes, this is we've reviewed it. This is our stamp of approval. Everything is set in place. Let's implement this restriction. And so the case manager is definitely going to have and should have been involved in the conversations prior to it going to HRC because of the fact that that's a team discussion.
Well, and both the case manager, I mean, we've revised this document, both the case manager and we've always had the guardian approved, but we'll have those signatures already. So they've been aware, right? They had to be aware because they had to sign off on the plan in advance. And if they aren't signing off on the plan, then, I mean, it can't be presented. It's got to go back to the team, right?
Right, informed consent is a part of the federal requirement. So without that piece, it can't go through HRC. Without informed consent, we can't do anything, essentially. So the HRC would be the last step prior to implementation.
Right. So I feel like that connects the dots, like Julie was saying. There is a chat in there's a comment in the chat box from Naomi that on the CSP side, their internal support coordinators send out the emails to the case managers to let them know when HRC is meeting so they can touch base with their participants and request time to meet with a HRC if they want to come and help advocate with them.
We have had this, Naomi, we have had case managers who have come and met with our HRC committee with the participant to help advocate and talk to them about why the restriction, why they don't want the restriction in place. And in some cases, it makes a difference. The HRC is able to, they understand the consequences and they have the informed consent and, you know, they don't pass that restriction. And in some cases, you know, they still pass it, but they may ask more questions and limit the time to, you know, we need more updates next month or so. We have had case managers actually come and advocate with the participants.
Thanks, Naomi. That helped. And I was kind of typing as you were talking. So how does this read to be more reflective of that case manager role and expectation? As requested, if requested.
I think it works.
So it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it references that there's a meeting, but it doesn't necessarily like say attend this meeting. It could be through some other mechanism.
It could be through email. It could be, I think it works.
Okay. Anything else with HRC?
I just have one question or comment maybe. Through SMART reviews, and it's not listed in this document, we were cited in a SMART review for only having the same signature all year round from the same committee member. And I didn't think that as a case management provider, we would have necessarily anything to do with who signs, how often. Found that strange. In these expectations, from your perspective, DDD staff, what are your thoughts regarding like who signs, how often, same member, just.
So, okay, let me say it back to you and make sure I'm understanding. Okay, so there was a citation made under, I'm just gonna say other rights restrictions for HR, like what was do you remember the causal factor that was selected?
No intervention, case manager.
No intervention, and that was because only one member, one representative of the HRC was signing
Yeah,
at each review. Okay.
and maybe that's not a discussion for here. If it fits in here through SMART, I just wondered if there was a section in here needed on the case management side stating some kind of oversight of membership, and it's not, which I don't think it should.
If you could email Jay's and I, like the participant name and maybe the month, then we can take a look at that and do a little bit more digging and follow up here and get more information. I don't want to give a blanket response without having more information. So, and then we can follow up with you.
All right, if it doesn't belong in this section or this document, I'm good with that.
There's a couple comments in the chat box from Katie Kelly. We have 34 minutes left for the meeting. And from Georgia, it seems like the same point is made in bullets 2 and 4 on the CM side.
Okay, let's see.
And then Katie says maybe bullet 4 could be a sub bullet.
So this one and this one. Yes, I see that.
So I don't know, I'm just thinking, instead of, I don't love the word assist, but because that can mean so many different things, but so maybe, I guess I agree with Georgia, but maybe it's when we talk about assist, what are those ways that are assisting? What does that look like? And maybe that's some of the sub bullets.
I feel like bullet 2 though would capture all of that because it says advocate with.
But it's during, is it during the Human Rights Committee? Is it, I don't want it to be that specific either. Like it can be, I think there can be ways.
So if we did some sub bullets, and maybe this could say, on behalf of the participant to the Human Rights Committee as requested, instead of saying meeting specifically, I'm going to need some help with any sub bullets on like how that might be occurring. Because I could make some stuff up, but I don't know that it would be true or helpful at all. So, so if we take the word meetings out of here, and then
maybe
we could
have,
take this
participate, right?
And then
So
put some
maybe-
sub bullets here.
I think that would be wise.
Okay. Well, if
I feel like they're saying the same thing. I don't get the sub bullet.
So what I thought I heard was that the sub bullets would say like that could be through email to the HRC or the HRC chair, or it could be attending a meeting, or it could be helping the person prepare. See, I'm just making stuff up. I don't know if it's true or helpful.
That's what I was picturing, I guess, but maybe that's too much. Maybe that needs to be in the guide, not here. I don't know. But I think if we're asking CMs to reference this and use this as a working document, it'd be nice to have that.
I also think it's useful to have that in there so the CSPs know that that's what case managers are expected to assist with as well.
So I'm gonna put a couple things here, and I'm definitely gonna highlight them. So if for those case managers on the call who are attending today, send me via email just some other things that happen or could happen to fill in here. Katie's gonna strangle me when this is over because we gotta keep moving. So, okay, behavior support plans.
So one comment that I had, the first couple bullets on the case manager side where it says facilitate rights restriction and review rights restriction. Should it be the behavior support plan versus the rights restriction, or should it be highly restrictive rights restrictions and behavior support plans? Because they don't review all the other rights restrictions.
Yes. Cheryl had emailed me yesterday with a comment about, so her comment was that not all behavior support plans include highly restrictive measures, which is accurate. Our rule, and I mean, we have a lot in waiver around this. It all basically it's all based on the premise that if you're using a highly restrictive procedure, a BSP is required. So we know that there are BSPs that really are more supportive and there's not any restrictive measure being implemented. So are there any suggestions for how to like how we address that in this section? Okay, well, you guys have the same ideas I had. All right, I'll keep thinking of it. And if anybody else comes up with anything, let me know. All right. What else? Did I? Oh, I need to change that over here, right?
I don't understand that change you're making. Why are you saying just highly restrictive?
Because the behavior support plan and behavior support committee is not required. So if there's a rights restriction on food, for example, that's not required to be reviewed by the behavior support committee. They have to review any plan that includes highly restrictive measures. So physical restraint, mechanical, chemical, timeout, anything like that.
Oh, but this is under behavior support plans. There's another section for the behavior support committee.
True.
And so doesn't the plan include all restrictions?
No, well, I think that's the hard part, because not all behavior support plans are restrictive.
Right,
And
but
don't
don't
go ahead,
behavior
Laura.
support plans need to include all restrictions? I know that there's additional things that aren't restrictive, but don't they have to include all restrictions? For say food that's not highly restrictive?
So
My understanding is behavior support plans do not have to include all rights restrictions. The ones that fall into the other rights restriction categories are not required to be in behavior support plans.
if we look at, I'm gonna use my hyperlinks real quick. hopefully the right thing linked. So we're referencing the rule that talks about the behavior support plan policy. So the expectation, of course, is then that translates into how you implement that policy. So this is largely, how large is that for you guys? Is it hard to see?
I can't see it.
So, I mean, we're talking about, so we have all of these statutes, and these are largely about modification to behavior, functional behavior analysis that needs to occur before any of those behavior modification plans can be implemented. So if we look at the rule, it does talk about due process, but this specifically calls out highly restrictive procedures. And I'm going to kind of look to other work group members because I don't think all CSPs lump other rights restrictions together with highly restrictive. So if I'm trying to, if I have a behavior support plan and we're trying to modify someone's behavior, and you know, if after redirecting and prompting and all of those less restrictive things have been tried, that behavior support plan includes a physical intervention, that has to be reviewed by the behavior support committee. Whereas a food restriction in your example, I think is what you mentioned, Georgia, wouldn't be considered highly restrictive and would not require behavior support committee review. Does this make sense? And I mean, all providers do it a little differently. And I think that is honestly what can probably get a little bit confusing when we're talking through these things, because you know, the procedure that you develop to follow the policy might be different than Lifescapes or SESDACs or New Horizons. Okay, I just realized that I was sharing my screen, but I wasn't really just sharing that Word document, so the authority didn't actually pull up. So
I think that's fine. I was just,
sorry about that.
yeah.
If you click on that link, I promise it pulls up.
I'm fine with that. I was just confused by it.
Yeah. Okay, so let me go back to this. So given that, what other thoughts or questions do we have?
Heidi, can you clarify your comment? There are certain, there are more, I would say there are more things that CMS now considers a restriction, but I don't know that they're all necessarily highly restrictive.
It says in the new settings policy rule that they're all considered highly restrictive. It's on page 11. That they're all, any changes identified through rights assessment with any concept area must be documented in the ISP and identified as highly restrictive procedure.
On
That's in the new rule.
The Guide to Expectations and Compliance.
Yep, page 11. So if we're saying highly restrictive procedures, now that will be anything in any of those concept areas listed. So location, living arrangements, privacy, dignity and respect, physical accessibility, autonomy, and community integration are now considered highly restrictive measures. So I don't know if we want to use the highly restrictive terminology in this section, because then it would imply that all of those areas have to go through the behavior support plan as well. Unless you want to review those in the behavior support committees.
Jays, I think that's something that we're gonna have to talk about in the other committee, right? Like in the other work group, because I did not catch that. But if it's highly, right, if it's highly restrictive.
It could say behavior support plan here instead of highly restrictive procedures.
Right.
So facilitate behavior support plan discussion.
The highly restrictive will include all those other things now, so.
Sorry, I'm reading.
So what I'm going to do a little bit for time's sake, and Jesus taking a look at it, but I would guess that we'll need to do some internal follow-up. I'm gonna highlight both of these terms. So Carrie and Katie and Jace, please hold me accountable and remind me why I highlighted those two things after this meeting. If I come back to it tomorrow and I'm like, it's left my brain, I'm pretty sure I'll remember this conversation, but I'm gonna highlight where I changed those. Um,
I do worry a little bit about the word facilitate the behavior support plan, because there are people at community support providers that have been specifically trained in behavior support plans. Case management necessarily has not. So it hasn't always, I mean, it's rarely that the case manager is facilitating that conversation. So maybe I'm understanding that incorrectly, but I feel like there's training that would need to occur and understanding on the community support provider side in order for case management to actually facilitate those discussions.
so
I
I
agree.
think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with that.
So if we frame it, I'm going to scroll back up for a quick second. If we frame it in the same way we do here, does that make more sense? Where it's facilitating the ISP discussion regarding the behavior support plan?
I mean, yeah, we can put these things in an agenda and maybe, but we don't tend to facilitate it. I mean, we might bring it up and then it gets kind of turned over to the expert on the CSP side, kind of. Sometimes.
Well, yeah, and I mean, facilitating a meeting doesn't mean that you're the one talking the whole time. It just means that you're making sure that the appropriate topics get covered, right? And that the people who can speak to it are able to speak to it. So, and that might be a clarification we need to make, is that facilitating doesn't mean I do everything. Facilitating means like leading and guiding the conversation to make sure all the topics are covered and that no one is shouting at each other and that, you know, we can all come to some sort of conclusion.
Right. So maybe in the meeting minutes that are let's taking, we can just say for the training, let's define facilitate and leave it the way it is for now, so we can move on for purpose of time.
Okay, Jace, did you have a chance to dig in or will we need to do a little follow-up?
Yeah, still reading.
Okay. So while Jace is reading, let's scroll down into the behavior support committee portion. And I think this is highlighted for the same reason that we had the review and approval highlighted in the rights restriction section. It would be sort of the same, although I don't know that you know, obviously there's guidance from HCBS settings for highly restrictive. I would imagine it's the same as lesser restrictive methods, but
I feel like that bullet's gonna need to be modified to use some different language like we did under behavior support plans.
okay. Yes, okay. I'm also thinking that we could add a similar bullet like that with the advocating. This one under the behavior support committee. Does that make sense?
I haven't seen any reference to emergency restrictions because, you know, review and approve prior to implementation. Well,
So
there's
emergency restrictions,
emergencies.
we have its own section right here.
Okay,
I just forgot, I honestly, I had clumped that on the agenda together with the rights restrictions and I kind of forgot about it because it's out of order on the paper, on the document.
So I think that you could, on the behavior support, you know, when you guys were talking about highly restrictive, you know, I think we need to define that. And that's what Jay's is looking into right now. But I think we could actually have it say, if the plan, like I would just say, if the plan, like the team needs to determine if there are highly restrictive procedures in place. Step number 1, right? And if there is, then this is the process. Because it's additional, I mean, behavior, human rights committee review approvals, and HRC review and approvals. It's 2 versus 1. Does that make sense? Like, I think that we could just say if there's, yeah.
Well, I was also thinking like to make that distinction between the HCBS settings, highly restrictive, and what's required by rule. It could say to facilitate that discussion or present the plan for behavior support plans containing highly restrictive procedures as defined by, and then list the ARSD.
Make a note.
If the protocol is going to be different, I don't know that there's a decision on that right now, right?
Right. So if, yeah, I think the question that we have and that Jay's is diligently trying to find for us is whether or not all restrictions are considered highly restrictive under the HCBS settings rule. And if so, then that is going to change the way our rules are implemented. And so, I mean, there's a lot of domino effect with that, which if it is, then it is, but if it's not, then we want to make sure that the expectations guide is clear and that we can translate that into this document. So I know it's 11:19 and I'm getting the sense that we're probably not going to have that resolved, unfortunately, in the next 11 minutes, but we'll do some follow-up and we'll send a message to this group so there's some resolution. And then we'll update these sections accordingly. Or not update them accordingly, yes, you know, depending on which way it goes. So knowing there's a lot hinging on that, and that could change people's comments considerably. So when we send that message out, please take another look. And if you have questions or things need clarification, you know, send me a message. I'm hoping to get this. So today's the 1st. I'm hoping to get this document sent out by the middle of next week. So there's a full week for people to review it before the stakeholder meeting. So we'll try to have some resolution in the next couple days and send a message. And so I would just ask that if you, you know, as soon as possible, once you get the message, respond accordingly with any questions or edits you would suggest for this. I'm not loving leaving that big item hanging out there, but it is what it is right now. So I appreciate you bringing that forward, Heidi. I mean, there's a lot that hinges on that. So that is a very important point. Let's go down to emergency rights restrictions to make sure that we have an opportunity to review that as a group.
I think a piece that's missing in here is the CSPs notifying case managers when there is an emergency restriction happening, or,
Okay.
you know, the fact that it's happened.
This is Sharon. It's been my experience when you have an emergency rights restriction, it usually goes along with a CIR notifying the division. Maybe not all the time, but most of the time.
Mhm.
It does if it's a highly restrictive procedure.
Yes, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Um,
Has anybody ever had an HRC deny something that already occurred? Because
We have,
okay.
like, we have where it was say a physical hold wasn't, there was other ways to maybe deal with a behavioral issue, and staff did a physical hold, or the physical hold was done incorrectly. So those are CIRs, but our HRs, the emergency approval would have been denied. So that would be my question underneath the second bullet, you know, that presents alternative restrictions. There's times where if they are denied, our team doesn't get together because it's more of retraining for staff on how to handle that situation instead of the team.
so, right, so the ISP team wouldn't convene if you identified a training issue because
Right.
a staff member incorrect, you know, they jumped to step 4 when they, you know, when
Yeah.
they shouldn't have. It's a good question. So would it make sense? And so I'm saying this knowing that, I mean, I took administrative rule and put it in a little bit friendlier language here. So I don't want to misconstrue, if we add another sub bullet, I don't want that to come across as like, oh, this is also in rule. The ISP team doesn't have to come together, but I see what you're saying, Arlette. So does it make sense to add another sub bullet, or maybe a sub bullet within this, even that the provider would then the verbiage is escaping me, but like conduct follow-up and identify individual training issues or staff training issues that maybe were discovered as a result of the highly restrictive measure or something like that.
Maybe if you just note something like personnel, staff training, you know, personnel issues were identified or staff training was needed, the team doesn't need to convene or something, I don't know.
Right.
And when you guys do the CIR on something like that, would that be specified that, you know, staff is being addressed or whatever? Okay, then, I mean, then we'd know as case management that we wouldn't pursue that further. Maybe that would be as identified in the high GER or CIR preventative actions or follow-up.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because that would be that would make sense for me. Nope, I didn't want to do that though. Like that, does that flow better? I'm gonna just highlight this and work on the verbiage later because it's not coming to me. Everyone's staring at me, it's too much pressure. Okay, so I had highlighted this area on the case management side, just with the thought in mind, because Jay's and I hadn't had an opportunity to talk specifically about emergency rights restrictions, knowing that there are some that might be highly restrictive and some that are more like not highly restrictive, but that assuming that the expectation would be the same for the case manager, but in that unique situation where it occurs after, not knowing quite how to phrase that. So Jay's, any thoughts on this? Like it would be a similar role, correct?
Well, how do they approve or deny it when it's already done? I mean, could it just be that they're reviewing it and then like tie it in with the first bullet, they review it? And if the HRC denied, then they would convene the team?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of similar to the HRC review. The event has happened. But obviously the lines of communication still need to exist. So I like the way that you said that, Amy, if you could say that again.
Yes, please.
Like I was just gonna, I didn't think it would be a sub bullet. I thought the first bullet would be revised to say review emergency rights restrictions, and if HRC, like leave the rest of it as it is.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and then I would take that out.
Because there's no consent forms for emergency rights restrictions because they're done after the fact. So what you're doing is a notification.
Right.
No, doesn't, I mean, rule requires 24-hour notice, not that it's present at, for emergency rights restrictions. The last bullet. At the regular, yeah.
So, yes,
Emergency
so
restrictions
there's
are
this.
24 hours.
This has the 24 hours.
I missed that, okay.
And then if they deny, then you have to also at the next full HRC meeting, bring forward any emergency restrictions that were implemented.
Gotcha, okay, sorry.
So maybe I need to move this here, so it's not like after the CIR one that we added.
So is it only if they're denied that they have to be presented at the next regular scheduled meeting? Or is it all of them? Sorry. I had
All
it
of them
open.
are.
It's all of them.
Yeah, I think it's
Okay,
all
thank
of them.
you. That's, sorry, I just was like, I can't remember. So,
Back to
okay.
that, back to the bullet point, the number one under the case manager, could that be if HRC denies emergency rights restriction, convene ISP team as needed? Because if it is just a training issue for staff, we don't need to meet the full team.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, well, I know we are at time, everybody. As always, if you have other things that, we didn't have an opportunity to talk through, send me any comments or other revisions that you would recommend. Jason and I will talk about the highly restrictive issue, and we'll send out some follow-up in the next day or two. And like I mentioned, if, as a result of the outcome of that conversation and guidance, if you have additional recommendations or questions or things that we need to address in training, any of those, please send those to us as soon as possible so we can get those included in that kind of summary table for the stakeholder meeting. And we can get this updated and everything kind of organized before the stakeholder meeting on the 15th. I would want to, and like I said, I would want to send, I'm trying to send those out by the end of the day on the 8th. So there's plenty of time for everyone to review this rather large document that we've worked really hard on. So want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I, again, as always, thank you guys for showing up and bringing your great questions and perspective and investing your time and energy in this really important work. We are on the home stretch. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week.
So Julie,
Yes.
did you say that we were